abomination. This is an abomination. Because of this your problem, the marriage will be over.
I can't breathe.
Uncle, I'm not God.
No, you're not.
I'm not God.
But I am
Sit down
begging
there.
for your forgiveness because I did not mean to lie
Every
to
time
you.
forgiveness. How many times I will forgive you?
I know Lisa, and she promised not to do it anymore. So, despite all her mistakes, I still want to marry her. I have to talk to him. He's my uncle. So I will explain everything to him.
Daniel, what's going to happen if he doesn't forgive us?
I don't know. I can't tell.
The moment the uncle says the marriage is over, everything collapses at once. Not slowly, not gently, just gone in a second. And you can almost feel the air leave the room as Lisa starts spiraling. Her breathing gets uneven. Her words stop making sense. And Daniel stands there frozen, not as a hero, not even as a partner, but like someone doing fast mental math because he knows this is bigger than emotions now. This is about consequences. And the wild part is, this didn't come out of nowhere. Because if you rewind just a little, before the panic, before the shouting, before the word abomination gets thrown around like a final verdict, you start to notice something off from the beginning. Lisa wasn't just nervous. She was scared in a way that feels deeper than a normal apology-like. She already knew this conversation wasn't going to be about explaining, it was going to be about surviving. And then you look at Daniel, and something doesn't fully add up there either. Because yes, he looks tense, yes, he says he loves her, but at the same time he's controlling how the truth comes out, deciding who speaks and when, almost like he's managing damage instead of facing it. And that raises a question you can't ignore. If this is just about honesty, then why does it feel like a strategy session? Now here's where it gets interesting. Because the uncle's reaction isn't just anger, it's something sharper, something more personal. And you have to ask yourself, why does this hit him so hard? What exactly did Lisa hide that crosses this line? And more importantly, why does he take it as disrespect instead of just disappointment? And while all of this is happening, Lisa is already on the back foot, trying to explain, trying to speak, but getting shut down before she can even finish a sentence, which tells you everything about the dynamic in that room. Who holds the power, who gets heard, and who is expected to just stand there and take it. In my opinion, this is the moment where the story stops being about a relationship and starts turning into something else entirely, something heavier. Because now, it's not just about what happened, it's about who gets to decide what matters, who gets to forgive, and who has to beg for it. And if you're watching closely, you'll notice this isn't just one mistake blowing up. This feels like layers of something that's been building for a long time, something that was always going to explode the second the right person found out. Because the truth is, this isn't about one lie. This is about something much bigger. Before they even sit down, you can see it all over Lisa's face. This isn't nervous energy. This is fear that already expects punishment, like she's walking into a situation where the outcome is decided, and all she can do now is manage how bad it gets. And when she asks Daniel how they should approach being honest, even that question feels loaded, not with clarity, but with hesitation, like she doesn't trust her own voice to land safely in that room. And notice what happens next. Because it's subtle but important, she asks if she should speak first, and Daniel shuts that down almost instantly. Not aggressively, but firmly enough to set the tone. He says he'll handle it. He'll explain everything, and right there, without anyone saying it out. Loud, the hierarchy locks into place. He speaks, she waits, and that tells you more than any argument could. Because who speaks first isn't random, it's control. And Lisa seems to feel that, because instead of pushing back, she folds into it, which raises a bigger question. Why does she already look defeated before the real confrontation even begins? What has happened before this moment that makes her act like she's already lost? Then comes that one line that slips out and changes how you see everything, when she says, what if he doesn't forgive us? And you almost have to pause right there, because us doesn't sit right. Not in this context, not after everything we're about to hear, and it forces you to ask, is this shared responsibility? Or is this someone trying to spread the weight of their own actions? In my opinion, that single word reveals a lot, because Daniel doesn't correct her directly, but the situation itself does. This isn't equal blame. This is one person being judged and another person managing the fallout, and those are two very different positions. So now you're watching this play out with a new lens, because Daniel controlling the narrative starts to feel less like support and more like strategy, like he's deciding what gets revealed, how it's framed, and when it hits, and that brings up an uncomfortable thought. Is he protecting her? Or is he protecting what he stands to gain from this marriage? And at the same time, Lisa's energy keeps dropping. Her voice gets smaller. Her confidence almost disappears, like she knows something we don't yet. Like she understands how bad this is going to get once everything is said out loud. Because what's coming next isn't the full truth yet. Not even close. When Daniel first finds out the truth, his reaction is instant and intense. He doesn't pause. He doesn't process quietly. He reacts with shock, anger, and a clear line in the sand. He takes off the ring, says it's over, and walks away like this is a deal breaker he won't negotiate. And in that moment, it feels final, like there's no coming back from what he just heard. But then something shifts. Not slowly, not with a deep emotional conversation that we see play out, but almost off camera, in that quiet space where decisions get recalculated. Because the next time we see him, his tone is completely different. Now he's calm. Now he's saying he loves Lisa. Now he's willing to forgive. And that kind of emotional flip doesn't go unnoticed, because it raises a question that sits right under the surface. What changed? People don't usually go from ending an engagement to defending it without a strong reason, and in my opinion, this is where things stop being simple. Because Daniel himself has talked about what this marriage represents for him, the future, the opportunities, the life he's trying to build, and when you put that next to how quickly his stance softens, it's hard not to wonder if something bigger than emotions is part of the equation. Now, to be fair, let's not reduce it to one thing too quickly, because it's possible he does care about her. Feelings don't just disappear overnight, and sometimes people do step back, think, and decide to work through something messy instead of walking away. That happens. It's real, and it deserves to be acknowledged. But at the same time, the timing here is interesting. Because the forgiveness doesn't come after trust is rebuilt, it comes before anything is resolved, before the uncle even hears the truth, before the consequences fully hit, and that makes it feel less like closure and more like repositioning, like Daniel is adjusting his approach instead of changing his heart. And if you watch closely, even when he says he loves her, there's still tension underneath, like he's holding two things at once, his personal feelings and his long-term goals. And those don't always align cleanly. So now you're left with a question that doesn't have an easy answer, because it sits in that gray area where intention and benefit overlap. Is this about love? Is it about survival? Or is it about strategy dressed up as commitment? Because one thing is clear. Someone here is playing a long game. The second the uncle walks in, the energy changes. Not slightly, completely, like the room stops being a place for conversation and turns into a place where judgment is about to be delivered. And you can feel that shift without anyone needing to explain it. Because the way Daniel straightens up, the way Lisa pulls back, it tells you this isn't just family, this is authority. And the uncle doesn't waste time easing into it. He listens, but not like someone trying to understand, more like someone measuring what he's hearing against a standard that's already set, and the weight of that standard is heavy. It carries culture, expectations, reputation, and something deeper that goes beyond just this relationship. Because for him, this isn't private, this reflects on him, on his family, on everything he represents. Then comes the moment that quietly says everything. Lisa tries to speak. Not loudly, not disrespectfully, just enough to explain her side, and she gets shut down immediately. Not by one person, but by both, first Daniel. Then the uncle reinforces it, and the message is clear without needing to be repeated. This is not your turn. You will speak when allowed. Until then, you listen. And that's where it becomes uncomfortable to watch, because now it's not just about what she did, it's about where she stands. And where she stands is at the bottom of that structure, where her words don't carry weight, where her version of events doesn't lead the conversation, and whether you agree with her actions or not, seeing someone reduced to that position hits differently. Voice in that room equals power, and silence isn't calm, silence is submission. So now, every pause feels loaded, every sentence from the uncle feels final, and Lisa's presence starts to feel smaller and smaller, like she's being pushed into a corner where the only option left is to accept whatever comes next. Which brings up a question that keeps getting louder the more you watch. Is this reaction purely about what she did, or is it also about maintaining control, about reinforcing who gets to decide what is acceptable and what isn't? Because if you think this is already intense, you're still missing the part that changes everything. The real issue hasn't even been said out loud yet, and then it all comes out. Not piece by piece, not softened, but in a way that lands hard and keeps landing. Because what started as a simple explanation turns into a full exposure of a past that is way deeper, way longer, and way more complicated than anyone in that room was prepared for. And you can see it in the uncle's face the moment the timeline stretches out. This isn't a one-time mistake. This is years, decades even, of a life that was never fully disclosed. And that changes everything, because now it's not just about what Lisa did, it's about what she didn't say, what she chose to hide, and how long that silence lasted, and the contradictions start stacking up fast. What she told before doesn't match what's being revealed now, and each new detail doesn't just add information. It chips away at credibility. The uncle's reaction follows a clear path. First shock, like he's trying to process whether he heard correctly, then anger, sharp and immediate, because this feels like a direct violation of trust, and finally rejection, not hesitant, not uncertain, but firm, like a line has been crossed that he doesn't believe can be walked back. And the pace doesn't slow down. There's no space for reflection, no pause for empathy. It just keeps escalating, because every answer seems to raise another question, and every attempt Lisa makes to explain feels weaker against the weight of what's already been said. In my opinion, this is where the core issue becomes impossible to ignore, because while the surface conversation focuses on her past relationships, the emotional reaction is driven by something else, something deeper, and that is betrayal, not just of expectations, but of honesty itself. And betrayal hits harder than truth ever does, because it changes how every past interaction is seen. Now, everything she has said before becomes questionable, and that leads to a question that doesn't have an easy answer. Once trust is broken at this level, once someone feels they've been misled for this long, is there any real way to rebuild that? Or does every future word get filtered through doubt? Because for most people, this is the breaking point. This is where it ends. But somehow, this story doesn't stop here. The pace slows, but the pressure doesn't ease. It gets heavier in a different way, quieter, more uncomfortable. Because now, Lisa is no longer trying to defend facts. She's trying to be heard, and every time she opens her mouth, it feels like she's reaching for something that keeps slipping away. Her words don't land, they don't stick, they don't even get the chance to breathe before they're dismissed. She tries to explain her past, tries to frame it as something behind her, something she has moved on from, but the uncle doesn't engage with any of it. Not the explanation, not the emotion, not even the effort. He cuts through it all with one consistent message: he doesn't believe her, and once that belief is gone, everything else loses value. And that's where the shift becomes painful to watch, because Lisa's voice starts to break. Not in a dramatic way, but in a way that feels uncontrolled, like her body is reacting before she can stop it. Her breathing speeds up, her words get tangled, and what you're seeing looks like panic, not strategy. But the uncle reads it differently, he sees it as performance, as an attempt to gain sympathy, and that interpretation changes how he responds. There's no softness, no pause, no moment where he considers what she's feeling. Instead, her reaction seems to irritate him more, like it confirms his belief that she's not being genuine, and in that moment, the gap between them becomes impossible to bridge, because they're not even reacting to the same reality. In my opinion, this is where the situation crosses from accountability into something else, because holding someone responsible is one thing, but stripping them of any space to express themselves is another, and it forces you to ask a difficult question. Is this about making things right, or is it about making sure she feels the full weight of being wrong? And the idea of forgiveness starts to look different here. It's not offered as understanding, it's positioned as something she has to earn, prove, beg for, something controlled entirely by the person withholding it, and that kind of dynamic doesn't leave much room for dignity. So you're left watching this unfold, feeling the tension build in a quieter, heavier way, wondering where the line is between consequence and humiliation, and whether she's crossed into a space where no explanation will ever be enough, because what happens next takes it even further. And then she does something even more desperate, and then it happens. The moment that shifts everything from uncomfortable to almost shocking, because Lisa doesn't argue anymore, she doesn't try to explain, she drops down, physically, right there, in front of him, and you can feel the weight of that decision, because this isn't just asking for forgiveness now, This is surrender. It's one thing to apologize with words, it's another to put yourself in a position where your entire dignity is on the line, and that's exactly what this looks like. Not calculated, not controlled, but driven by desperation, like she believes this is the only move she has left. And for a second, you expect the energy in the room to shift. You expect at least a pause, but it doesn't come. The uncle doesn't soften, doesn't step back, doesn't even acknowledge the gesture in a way that suggests it matters, and that's where the tension spikes again. Because now the question isn't what will she do to fix this, it's whether anything she does will ever be enough. Then Daniel steps in, and this is where things get even more complicated, because now he joins her, not physically in the same way, but emotionally, he starts pleading too. Asking, pushing, trying to move the uncle's stance, and suddenly the dynamic changes. It's no longer one person begging for acceptance, it's two people trying to convince one authority to change his decision. And that tells you something important. This isn't just about love anymore, because when both of them start pleading like this, it becomes clear that the stakes are bigger than the relationship itself. There's something else tied to this outcome, something that makes walking away feel impossible for both of them, even after everything that's been revealed. And from a psychological angle, this is where desperation takes over completely. Because when people feel like they're about to lose something they can't replace, dignity becomes negotiable, boundaries blur, and actions that would normally feel unthinkable start to feel necessary. But the uncle still doesn't move, not immediately. And that creates a kind of silence that feels louder than anything that's been said so far, because now you're watching two people give everything they have in that moment, and it's still not enough to change his mind. So the question becomes harder to ignore. What could possibly make him reconsider at this point? Because just when it feels completely locked, like there's no way forward from here, something shifts, and suddenly his tone changes. The shift doesn't come with warmth, it comes with distance. And that difference matters, because when the uncle finally speaks again, the edge in his voice is lower, the volume drops, but the control is still there, just repackaged, and instead of repeating that the marriage is over, he introduces something new, something that sounds like a second chance on the surface, but feels more complicated the longer you sit with it. He says this decision isn't his to make, and that's where things get interesting, because just minutes ago, he was the final authority, the one drawing the line, the one shutting everything down without hesitation, and now suddenly, that authority shifts upward. Now it's about elders, about higher voices, about a level above him that needs to weigh in. And on paper, it sounds reasonable, almost fair, like he's opening a door instead of closing it. But if you look closely, the power hasn't disappeared, it's just moved. In my opinion, this isn't about giving up control, it's about protecting it. Because by passing the decision upward, he removes himself from being the sole person responsible for the outcome, while still maintaining influence over how the situation is framed, how it's presented, and what happens next. It's a careful repositioning. He goes from being the one who says no to the one who says let others decide, but he's still the gatekeeper to that next step, still the person who determines whether they even get that chance, and that creates a kind of control that's harder to challenge, because it doesn't look like control anymore. And the tone shift adds to that confusion, because it's not harsh, it's not aggressive, it almost feels measured, which makes you question what's really happening here. Is this a moment of reconsideration, or is this a strategic move to handle the situation without taking full ownership of it? Because now the stakes aren't lower, they're higher. What was once a private confrontation is about to become something public, something broader, something that involves more voices, more judgment, and more pressure. And for Lisa, that doesn't mean relief, it means starting over, from the bottom, all over again. So you're left with a question that sits right in the middle of this shift. Is this mercy? Or is this just a different kind of control? Because whatever this is, it's not forgiveness. This is a new level of judgment. And now the situation moves to a bigger stage, not in a dramatic spotlight kind of way, but in a way that feels heavier, because it's no longer just one man's judgment, it's a whole system waiting in the background. Elders, leaders, people whose approval carries weight far beyond this one relationship. And suddenly Lisa isn't just answering for her past to one person, she's about to present herself to a structure that expects consistency, obedience, and proof, which means this doesn't reset anything. It repeats it. She has to explain again, defend again, prove again. And every time she does, the standard doesn't get lower, it gets stricter. Because now more people are involved, more opinions, more expectations, and each one adds another layer she has to get through. And when you step back, you start to see the pattern. This isn't a single test, it's a cycle. Because even if she says everything right, even if she shows remorse, even if she does everything being asked of her, there's always another level, another person, another approval waiting on the other side, and that creates a loop where the finish line keeps moving. On one side, you have her personal truth, her explanation, her attempt to define her own story. On the other side, you have social acceptance, which doesn't run on her terms, it runs on rules that were set long before she entered the picture, and those rules don't adjust easily, if at all. So the question becomes less about what she did and more about what the system expects her to become in order to be accepted, and whether that expectation is even realistic. Because if the goal keeps shifting, then what is she really working toward? And if you look at it from a wider lens, you have to ask something uncomfortable. Who benefits from a structure like this, where one person has to keep proving themselves over and over, while others hold the power to approve or reject without ever being questioned? Because at some point, it stops feeling like a path to forgiveness and starts feeling like a process designed to keep someone in a constant state of trying. So the real question isn't what happens next. It's whether there's ever a point where she is enough, or if this was built in a way where she was never meant to win. So now you're left sitting with all of this, not just what Lisa did, but how everything around her responded to it. And if you're being honest with yourself, the picture isn't as simple as right and wrong anymore. Because yes, she lied, yes, she hid a major part of her past, and that broke trust in a serious way, no one is denying that. But look at everything else happening around her. Look at how quickly the situation turned into a test of submission, how her voice got smaller while everyone else's authority got louder, how forgiveness became something she had to earn in front of people who never had to question their own position in the same way, and suddenly it's not just about her actions, it's about the system she walked into. And then there's Daniel. Because his role doesn't sit clean either, he stands beside her, he defends her when it counts, but at the same time, his urgency feels tied to more than emotion. Like there's something else pushing him to keep this relationship alive, something practical, something long-term, and when you put that next to how everything unfolded, it adds another layer you can't ignore. Then, the uncle, firm, controlled, unwavering at first, then shifting just enough to pass the weight upward, keeping his influence while stepping back from the final call, and that move says a lot, because it shows how power doesn't always need to shout to stay in control. So now the real question changes. It's not just about whether Lisa deserves forgiveness. It's about who gets to decide that in the first place, and what they gain from being in that position. Because when you strip everything down, you're looking at power, shame, control, and relationships that aren't operating on emotion alone. They're tied to expectations, opportunities, and pressure from every direction. And that leaves you with something uncomfortable to sit with. If everyone has something at stake here, then who is really making decisions freely? And who is being pushed into roles they didn't fully choose? Because this isn't finished. Not even close. The next step isn't easier, it's harder, more public, more intense, and it's going to force Lisa to stand in front of people who hold even more authority with even less room for error. And the question now is simple. What happens when she faces them next?